We can cross to our correspondent in Nairobi, Julia Steers, who's been following the day's events. Julia, we've just heard there from the main EU election observer. The first presidential vote was cancelled because of irregularities. Can we be sure that this election is happening in a free and fair fashion?
No, as you just heard from the head of the EU mission there, we certainly cannot be sure that this has happened in a free and fair manner. The opposition supporters obviously staging a widespread boycott of the polls today. We saw incredibly low voter turnout in opposition strongholds and clashes between opposition supporters and police in many of those opposition strongholds here in Nairobi and in the western part of the country as well. And even going into the polls today, before these clashes of violence that may have prevented some people from turning up to vote at all, there were huge questions about possible illegalities in terms of the conduct of the Electoral Commission going into the election. And of course, Odinga's push for this boycott was really a push to delay the election in order to allow more electoral reform. So there were real and looming issues surrounding the credibility of this election, surrounding the Kenyan people's trust in this election. And of course, now we've gone through a day where where violence has marred a large part of the election in opposition strongholds and where we have significantly lower voter turnout than we saw here in August.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you about that, Julia, because there have been reports of at least 3 fatalities, mostly in the west of the country. I mean, was there more violence than anticipated, more or less sort of the atmosphere that was expected, or, you know, how did it play out in terms of expectations of tensions?
Well, people here certainly expected things to be tense today. There has been a ramping up of rhetoric from opposition supporters over the last few days. The day before the election, we had Raila Odinga here in Nairobi addressing thousands of supporters, telling them to stay at home and boycott the election. He did, however, also encourage them to remain peaceful, to stay at home and boycott the vote, but to also remain peaceful. And what we saw today was some opposition supporters really trying to disrupt the voting process in some areas. We heard from people saying they were intimidated to go to the polls. And what we also saw, though, was an excessive show of force from the police force here in Nairobi, in the opposition strongholds that we visited today. And we're hearing very similar reports from the western part of the country, which, of course, is where we have seen those deaths and where the election was really not able to take place today, which explains why they are trying to open the polls again on Saturday in those areas.
All right, Julia Steers, keeping us up to date on the day's events in Nairobi. Thank you very much for that.